What's up guys, Beefy here, and this video will show you how to fly a traffic pattern stall series, maneuvers used to train recognition of approach to stall conditions, as well as the appropriate procedures and reactions to nearly making your very own T6-shaped smoldering crater. We're going to cover entry parameters, maneuver execution for the overshooting, undershooting, and landing attitude stall, recovery procedures, and some common student errors. As a disclaimer, if you're watching this from somewhere other than Vance, the block altitudes referenced here might be a little different from what you're normally used to flying. And naturally, these procedures are only applicable to the T6 Alpha, so your mileage is definitely going to vary a smidge in any other aircraft. Training rules, which can be found in your in-flight guide, are going to be relevant to this set of maneuvers. Make sure you fly your TP stall series at least 6,000 feet AGL, you can maintain clear of clouds throughout the maneuver, you have at least 3 statute miles of visibility, and have a discernible horizon. Generally speaking, the traffic pattern stall is an energy-losing maneuver. Depending on the expediency of your setup and recovery, you might lose a few thousand feet over the course of the stall series. You might lose none at all. With that in mind, at Vance, it's commonly recommended to fly the maneuver at 10,000 to 10,500 feet in the low MOA. To facilitate that, it's common to set the series up following a maneuver like the Immelman and aileron roll or a power-on stall. Now, it should go without saying that TP stalls are simulating an approach to stall in the final turn, but I'm gonna say it anyway, you've got to be configured for these. Make sure you get below 150 knots before you drop your gear. The minimum airspeed for the traffic pattern stall entry is 120 knots, which makes sense since you should not be perching below 120 knots. The first TP stall we're going to do is an overshooting traffic pattern stall. The overshooting stall is simulating that we're overshooting the runway, and we need to increase our bank to shorten our turn radius in order to hit it. Confirm that you have handle down, 3 green, and flaps in whatever position you need them to be in, then roll off your simulated perch using your normal pitch, power, and roll technique. After you've perched, you initiate the approach to stall by reducing your power to idle and adding or subtracting bank, depending on whatever TP stall you happen to be doing. In the overshooting or nose-low stall, we're going to overbank, which causes a loss of lift, and it will be difficult to pull hard enough to keep the nose up. And as a consequence, it'll be tough to prevent excessive altitude loss prior to the approach to stall indications. A technique to mitigate this is to ease into a slightly nose-high attitude prior to rolling from 30 to 45 degrees of bank. Now, by the time the stick shaker activates, you'll be nose low, hence the name of the stall, but you won't be accelerating as precipitously towards the MOA floor. Make sure you keep the rudder centered. Neglecting the rudder in any of the TP stalls will result in buffet from turbulent air around the landing gear prior to stick shaker activation. And while this isn't the end of the world, it's sloppy. And that's exactly what happens on this first demo. Now, unfortunately, you won't be able to hear the buffet in the video, but buffet feels similar to light turbulence or rumbling near the roots of the wing. Buffet and stick shaker activation are both considered approach to stall indications, so as soon as you experience them, initiate your recovery using the mnemonic max, relax, roll. We'll do one more overshooting TP stall and keep things coordinated, then take it all the way to the stick shaker to demonstrate that. The aircraft is just about to hit 15.5 AOA, so we'll talk about how to execute max, relax, roll. To max, push the PCL to the forward stop. Because you're going from 0 to max power, you're going to need to slowly increase pressure in the right rudder in order to keep the rudder ball centered. Relax is easing off backstick pressure just a little to prevent actually getting into a stall. This is not nearly as aggressive as with a power-on stall. Close to the ground is not a great place to dump the nose. Simply relaxing your grip on the stick to alleviate demand is a commonly suggested technique. And finally, roll is the act of rolling your wings to level using coordinated aileron and rudder. This is critical because it gets your entire lift vector pointed away from the ground. Consider that at 30 degrees of bank, only 2/3 of your lift vector is pointed up. At 45 degrees of bank, only half of your lift vector is getting you away from the ground. Max, relax, and roll should all occur pretty much simultaneously. Delaying any one part costs you altitude that you really can't afford to lose. As you recover, pay attention to your rudder coordination and chase after the stick shaker to max perform the recovery. Unfortunately, at 10,000 feet, you really have less perspective on how little air there will be between you and the ground when this actually happens. You should be able to effect a positive vertical nose track, and you can cross-check your AOA gauge to help you out. You are recovered when you are in a wings level attitude and climbing on the altimeter in VSI. Airspeed, while an important thing not to run out of at low altitude, is not as important as not hitting the ground and not stalling the airplane. The next TP stall in the series we're doing here is the Undershooting Stall. The purpose of this approach to stall is to simulate trying to float a final turn to the runway due to winds either pushing you away or poor spacing control. Right now, we're just adjusting where the airplane is facing in the MOA so you don't have the sun burning out your corneas in the VR headset. Setup for the maneuver is the same as your last TP stall. Confirm your gear and flaps, and perch like you did last time. This is an excellent opportunity to practice the same pitch, power, and roll technique you would use in the pattern prior to going to idle, so don't waste the opportunity being sloppy. Reduce your power to idle, and ease out of some bank, closer to about 20 degrees. Slowly ease your nose up to maintain your altitude. Because you have less bank and more of your lift vector is pointed away from the ground, you'll approach a stall at a lower airspeed than with the overshooting stall. Once again, at the first indication of buffet or the stick shaker, recover using max relax roll. When your wings level and climbing on both your altimeter and VSI, you're recovered. While there's technically no specific pitch attitude you have to bring your nose to, a common technique is to stop when you're about firelights on the horizon. Firelights on the horizon, or about 12 degrees nose high, allows you to expedite your climb away from the ground while the aircraft is accelerating at most altitudes. A pro tip to speed up your setup for your next TP stall is to leave your power in max and lower your nose from your recovery attitude to accelerate to your setup airspeed, rather than pulling your power and losing altitude to speed up. The final TP stall in the series is the landing attitude stall. This simulates a high sinking flare scenario hilariously common in the first couple of blocks of trans. One notable difference about the setup between the landing attitude stall and the other two TP stalls is that because this landing attitude stall is post-perch, confirmation of the gear and flaps is not technically required. It is, however, a very good idea, lest you attempt a prop-only landing, which is a non-graded maneuver with a MIF of view. Start at a level flight attitude at 5 to 10 knots above your final approach speed commensurate with your flap setting. In the case of these TP stalls, 110 to 115 knots. Simultaneously pull the PCL back to idle while easing your nose into the landing attitude, about spinner on the horizon or 10 degrees nose high. Hold this attitude until you feel buffet or the activation of the stick shaker. Again, the recovery is max relax roll. However, there are some differences in the execution for the landing attitude stall. Max, of course, is max. Make sure to coordinate with your rudder as power spools up. Relax, though, is the major difference here. The relaxing motion of the stick should be very slight, maybe 1 degree of pitch change, really to prevent dumping the nose close to the ground and impacting in a 3-point attitude. We want to make sure that we don't demand any more AOA before power drags us out of this whole mess. Increasing backstick pressure prior to climbing away from the runway is a recipe for an actual stall, a tail strike, or a hard landing. Roll is perhaps a little superfluous in this case, but make sure you're coordinating with both aileron and rudder to keep the wings level. Because this maneuver is done at 0 degrees of bank, your stall indications will occur at the lowest airspeed of these 3 TP stalls, and any dramatic increase in bank can be dangerous in the MOA or fatal in the pattern. As power spools up and 2 positive rates of climb develop, you can increase backstick pressure to chase the stick shaker and make your recovered call when you have those 2 positive rates of climb verified. Finally, after way too much video, let's talk about some common student errors related to TP stalls. As it relates to GK, recovery criteria are often confused or forgotten. Remember, it's wings level and climbing on 2. Likewise, students often forget entry parameters for the landing attitude stall versus the other 2 TP stalls. During setup, students often drone at a power setting and wait for airspeed to stabilize, instead of using pitch to trade altitude for airspeed. Also during setup, being too low in the MOA may cause you to flirt with the bottom during execution. During your execution, if you forget about backstick pressure as you increase your bank, you may lose excess altitude prior to approach to stall indications. Not coordinating the rudder will result in buffet well before the stick shaker. I think you're better than that. For recovery, don't forget to keep the wings level. Students are often not aggressive enough on recovery and don't chase after the stick shaker. Chasing after the stick shaker may not give you the greatest rate of climb, but you will lose the least amount of altitude, which is more important. Finally, not coordinating with the rudder at high AOA and low airspeeds is a recipe for a torque roll or a departure from controlled flight. And while the events that would immediately follow would make a great OPR bullet for your instructor, you shouldn't do either if you want to keep doing this flying thing. We'll now go back and play through the TP stall series one more time without all of the pauses and interruptions. Pay close attention to the pacing of the setup, approach to stall indications, and the recovery.